Welcome back. In this lecture, we begin to talk about word meaning and how to decide if two words have the same meaning. Let's look at some fundamentals. You may remember from an earlier lecture, we talked about the difference between lemmas and word forms. A lemma is a citation form that has the same stem, the same part of speech, some rough semantics, where a word form is the inflected word as it appears in text. So for example, the word form banks has a lemma bank, the word form sung has a lemma sing, and this is of course true for all languages. The in Spanish word duermes has the lemma dormir, the you sleep and to sleep. Now each lemma can have multiple meanings. So for example, the lemma bank, we can have a sentence like a bank can hold the investments, or the East Bank. So here we have some kind of financial institution, and here's some kind of sloping land, let's say. So we call this difference sense. We say a sense or a word sense is a discrete representation of the aspects of a word meaning. And so we want to say that lemma bank here has two senses, or at least two senses. Sense one, this financial institution, and sense two, this sloping land. The word homonymy means the situation in which words share a form but have distinct unrelated meanings. We call the two words homonyms. Homonyms, homonymy. So bank one, financial institution, and bank two, sloping land, are homonyms. Similarly, bat one, club for hitting a ball, and bat two, a nocturnal flying mammal, are homonyms. Now homonyms come in two forms. They can be homographs, that's words that are spelled the same, whether or not they're pronounced the same or differently. So bank and bat are homographs. Or they can be homophones, so write, W-R-I-T-E, and write, R-I-G-H-T, sound the same, but they're spelled differently. And so sometimes homonyms are both homographs and homophones, so bank and bat are both homographs and homophones. Sometimes they're only pronounced the same, but spelled differently. Sometimes they're only spelled the same, but pronounced differently. Homonymy causes a number of problems for applications in natural language processing. So if you're doing information retrieval and you ask about bat care, we don't know if you have a pet flying mammal or if you're a baseball fan. And machine translation, the similar problem. If you say the English word bat, in Spanish, you might mean the flying mammal, or again, you might mean a baseball club. Text to speech, the instrument, the stringed instrument called bass, is pronounced differently than the fish called a bass. So if we're going to read a word out loud in text to speech, we have to know which word we're talking about. So consider these two senses of the word bank. The bank was constructed in 1875 out of local red brick, and I withdrew my money from the bank. Are those the same sense? We might call sense two financial institution. So I withdrew my money from this financial institution. And sense one, something about the building. So here, when I say this bank was constructed, I really mean the building associated with the bank. So these two senses, the financial institution and the building belonging to the financial institutions, are related. So when the two senses of a homonymous word are related, we call the word polysemous. So a polysemous word has multiple related meanings. And most non-rare words have multiple meanings, and so polysemy is quite common. When the meanings between related words are systematic, we call this systematic polysemy, or sometimes metonymy. So lots of polysemy is systematic. So for example, words like school, university, hospital, all of these have the same polysemy we saw for bank. They can mean the institution or they can mean the building. So we say there's a systematic relationship between buildings and organizations. There's other kinds of systematic polysemy. So we might refer to an author, Jane Austen wrote Emma, or her works. I love Jane Austen, meaning I love the books that she writes, or Jane Austen is stored on that shelf over there. Trees, we might talk about the blossoms of plums, or the fruit, the plum I ate yesterday. And again, a systematic polysemy between authors and works of the author, or trees and their fruit. So lots of kinds of systematic polysemy like this. how do we know when a word has more than one sense? One test we often use is the Zeugma or Zeugma test. Consider these two senses of the word serve. Which flights serve breakfast, and does Lufthansa serve Philadelphia? Where here we mean give a meal to a passenger, and here we mean an airline flies to a particular city. And the Zeugma test says, let's form a sentence using both senses of the word serve and see how bad it sounds. So, does Lufthansa serve breakfast and San Jose? Well, that sounds funny. And so since this conjunction sounds weird, we say these are two different senses of serve. We say two words are synonyms if they have the same meaning in some or all contexts. So a nut can be called hazelnut by some people and filbert by others, and it means the same thing. Or a couch and a sofa, or the words big and large, or automobile and car. So we say two lexemes are synonyms if they can be substituted for each other in all situations. And if that's the case, we say they have the same propositional meaning. Now, as it happens, there are very few or perhaps no examples of perfect synonymy. Even if many aspects of meaning of two words are identical, they still may not preserve their acceptability depending on politeness or slang or register or genres. So while water and H2O technically mean the same thing, in practice, we're not going to use H2O to describe our beautiful day in the mountains looking at a running stream. Even big and large, which seem like they might be synonyms, have different meanings in different situations. Let's look at that. So we might say, how big is that plane? Or would I be flying on a large or small plane? And it sounds like the senses of big and large are the same there. They seem like synonyms. They both refer to a measure of size, and we're large on some scale of size. But consider these sentences. Miss Nelson became a kind of big sister to Benjamin. Miss Nelson became a kind of large sister to Benjamin. Now here, big and large mean very different things. Big sister means older sister here, and large sister simply can't have that meaning. It means a physically larger sister, which is a funny kind of meaning. And so we want to say that big here, big has a sense that large simply lacks. Big has a sense, there's a sense of big that means older or grown up, and large just lacks this sense. So sometimes, even if two words seem to have very similar meaning, some of the senses may be different between the two words. And that tells us that synonymy is really a relation between senses rather than a relationship between words. So we say that one of the senses of big, the one meaning physically large, and one of the senses of large, meaning physically large, it's hard to define, isn't it? Both of those senses are in a synonymy relationship, but not the entire words. Another important relationship between word senses is antonymy. So antonyms are senses that are opposites with respect to one feature of meaning and otherwise very similar. So we have dark and light, short and long, fast and slow. All these are words which are have very similar meanings. Short and long both mean I'm a property of length, and short just means I'm at this end of the scale, and long means I'm at the other end of the scale. So more formally, we say antonyms define a binary opposition, or they can be at opposite ends of the scale. So two kinds of antonymy. So in long and short and fast and slow, we have this binary opposition, or they can be reversives. So in a verb like to rise or to fall, or the words up and down, they're not at different ends of the scale, they're different directions. So we say they're reversive directions. So two kinds of antonymy. Again, relationships between senses, specific kind of relationship between senses. And perhaps the most important relationship between senses that we'll see is that of hyponymy and hypernymy. So we say that one sense is a hyponym of another if the first sense is more specific or denotes a subclass of the other. So we say that car is a hyponym of vehicle, mango is a hyponym of fruit. So another word for hyponym might be subclass or subordinate. And conversely, hypernym or superordinate, I try to remember this by saying that hyper is super. Here we have vehicle is a hypernym of car, meaning it's a supertype of car. Car is a subtype of vehicle. Vehicle is a superordinate of car. Fruit is a hypernym of mango. And so I've given you some examples here with the superordinate like vehicle and the subordinate like car. So hypernyms or hyponyms, hypernyms, hyponyms, or superordinate, subordinate will be synonyms here. Now, more formally, we say that the class denoted by the superordinate or hypernym extensionally includes the class denoted by the hyponym. We can define hyponymy also by entailment. We say a sense A of a hyponym, a sense A is a hyponym of sense B if being an A entails being a B. And hyponymy is usually transitive. So if A is a hyponym of B and B is a hyponym of C, that entails that A is a hyponym of C. And another common name for this hyponymy hierarchy is the is-a hierarchy. Intuitively, we say A is a B or A is a B, sometimes without the dash. Or we also sometimes say that B subsumes A. And we'll see all of these terms, is-a, hyponymy, subsumption hierarchy, as we proceed through the course. We often make a distinction between hyponyms and instances, and in WordNet, the thesaurus we'll talk about in a bit, has both classes and instances. An instance is an individual, a proper noun that is a unique entity, and so we say San Francisco, that instance, is an instance of the class city. So instance is a relationship between an individual and a class. City is a class, and so we can say city is a hyponym of municipality or location or other kinds of classes. So hyponymy or subsumption is a relationship between a class and another class. Instance is a relationship between an individual and a class. These are some of the fundamental definitions we'll need in talking about extracting word meaning.